My name's Liam, and I'm just your average American guy. A hardworking electrician who takes pride in tackling a tough job and seeing it through. I live in a cozy house with my wife, Amelia, in a quiet town where life tends to move at a comfortable pace. Amelia and I have been married for 8 years. She's smart and driven, a sociology professor at the local university. Our life together has been good. At least that's what I thought. We had plans, dreams, and the usual mix of laughter and disagreements, like any couple. But lately, something had felt off. It was a Wednesday evening, just past 6 p.m., when I finally got home. I'd stayed late at work to wrap up a wiring project that my supervisor, Lucas Ross, had handed me earlier in the day. It was a beast of a job, but I managed to finish it nearly half a day ahead of schedule. My muscles ached, but it felt good to get it done. Amelia had left that morning for a 3-day seminar in Columbus, which meant I had the house to myself. It wasn't often I got time alone, so I figured I'd use it to catch up on work and maybe even tackle a few projects around the house. Originally, I'd wanted to go with her, but Amelia had put her foot down. "No, you're not coming," she'd said, her tone firm, almost irritated. "Let's wait until the cruise during spring break. That's our time together." I'd agreed, though I couldn't hide the sting of disappointment. That cruise was something we'd been looking forward to for months. The tickets, proudly displayed in our china cabinet, were a reminder of better times ahead. When I walked in the door, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I set my toolbox down and hung up my jacket, glancing at my phone. There were no messages or missed calls from Amelia. That wasn't like her. Normally, she'd at least text to say she'd made it safely. I felt a slight unease creep in and decided to call her. Grabbing the home phone, I dialed her number. She picked up after 2 rings, sounding unusually cheerful. "Liam, I was just about to call you," she said, her voice bright and upbeat. I chuckled, trying to match her energy. "Got that mind-reading thing down to an art, huh? So, did you make it there okay? How was the traffic? Please tell me the car's still in one piece," I joked, imagining her rolling her eyes on the other end. If we'd been face to face, she probably would have stuck her tongue out at me. Amelia laughed. "Everything's fine. Traffic was light and I found the hotel with no problem. Thanks for that map you printed for me, by the way. You're a lifesaver. You know I'd do anything for you, darling." "Nothing's too much for my Amelia," I said, my voice tinged with a playfulness I didn't entirely feel. Her refusal to let me join her on the trip earlier still stung, but I didn't let it show. "Yeah, I know," she said, her tone softening, almost relieved. "I'm just teasing," I added with a laugh. "I'll be a good boy and stay home." "Glad to hear it, Liam," she said, the tension in her voice easing. "It's going to be a boring few days anyway, seminars, discussions. No time for fun." That was Amelia, always practical. Reading my mind again. She added, "Oh, you reminded me. I couldn't find my travel bag. You know, the one with the sewing kit. Did you see it anywhere before I left?" "Maybe it's in the bedroom or the car trunk," I said, pacing toward the stairs. "Sure thing, babe. Hold on," I replied, grabbing the cordless phone and heading upstairs. I found her bag sitting on the dresser, exactly where she must have left it in her rush. "Found it," I said into the receiver. "Careful with those buttons and lint." Amelia sighed in relief. "Thanks, Liam. Maybe I'll pick up some replacements at a store nearby if I can't fix them." Her tone was cheerful, but hurried, as if she were already distracted. "Got to go. Registration's open, and it's a busy week. Presentations, networking dinners, the works. But I'll call when I can. Okay? Saturday evening, we'll have some time together." "No worries, hun," I said. "Worked extra today, so I should be good through Thursday and Friday. Call me when you get a chance. I'll do the same if anything comes up." "See you Saturday for dinner." "See you," she replied. And with that, the call ended. I hung up and went back downstairs, her cheerful voice still ringing in my ears. It was a stark contrast to the strange tension I'd felt building between us over the past few months. Something about her tone didn't sit right. Not the warmth, but the way it felt. Calculated. Her firm rejection of my joke about joining her on the trip kept replaying in my head. She'd shot me down so quickly, like the idea itself was unthinkable. Why? Trying to shake the unease, I ordered a pizza. With about 40 minutes until it arrived, I grabbed a beer, changed out of my work uniform, and settled at the kitchen table. My job as an electrician kept me active, so I didn't feel guilty about indulging. Besides, Amelia wasn't a fan of pizza, which meant the leftovers were mine to enjoy for lunch tomorrow. I flicked on the TV, flipping through channels until I landed on the news. But I couldn't focus. My thoughts kept circling back to Amelia, her recent behavior, her sudden change of plans, and the way she seemed to brush me off more often lately. Amelia was 35, tall, and slender, with long dark hair and piercing eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She was proud of her work as a sociology professor, always speaking about her heavy workload and the students who filled her schedule. One name used to come up often: Marcos, her senior teaching assistant. He helped with grading and advising students, and for a while she mentioned him regularly. But recently, his name had stopped appearing in our conversations altogether. I wasn't sure why. Back in November, Amelia had told me about the seminars she'd be attending over the New Year break. She'd seemed open to the idea of me tagging along at first, but just 2 weeks later, she'd changed her mind. Suddenly, she preferred waiting for our spring break trip instead. I'd reluctantly accepted her decision, though it nagged at me. Over Christmas, we didn't talk about the seminars at all. We'd spent the holidays surrounded by family and friends, enjoying the kind of moments that felt simple and effortless. But after the new year rolled in, Amelia dove headfirst into preparing for the seminar. She received registration materials in the mail, filled them out immediately, and packed her things well before New Year's Eve, her meticulous nature shining through. Later that evening, after finishing my pizza and setting the leftovers aside, I headed back upstairs to grab a book I'd left on my bedside table. That's when I saw it: Amelia's travel bag, sitting in its usual spot in the closet. I picked it up to put it away properly and noticed something underneath it: her journal. Amelia's journal was something of a mystery to me. In all the years we'd been married, I'd only glimpsed it a couple of times. Once, early in our relationship, I jokingly asked if I could read it, and she'd shot the idea down so firmly it was clear it wasn't up for debate. "It's personal and private," she'd said, locking it away soon after. She never brought it up again, and I never asked. But now there it was. For a moment, I just stared at it, torn between curiosity and guilt. What could be so private that she'd go to such lengths to hide it? What was in there that I wasn't allowed to see? I picked it up, the leather cover cool against my fingers, and debated what to do next. Our schedules rarely aligned. Amelia was home when I left for work and gone by the time I returned. It was easy for her to keep secrets, and I couldn't ignore the growing sense that she had been doing exactly that. Curiosity burned as I held her journal in my hands. The small, 6x8-inch red leather book with its brass lock and latch felt heavy, like it contained more than just her thoughts. Maybe it held the answers I was looking for, the reason behind her recent behavior. Instead of returning it to the dresser, I carried it downstairs to the kitchen where the light was brighter. I turned it over in my hands, examining it closely. Only about a third of the pages were filled, meaning it couldn't possibly hold 8 years of entries. That realization made me pause. Were there more of these older journals hidden somewhere? I guessed her closet would be the best place to start. Heading back upstairs, I searched for about 5 minutes before spotting a shoebox on the top shelf. Inside was exactly what I had suspected: a stack of red leather diaries. I carried them back down to the kitchen, setting them on the table next to the current journal. Each had a small white sticker on the spine numbered 1 through 6. The one I'd found earlier was unnumbered, clearly the most recent. The back covers were all embossed with Cum Specialties, a local shop that sold unique and handmade items. The locks on all 7 journals were identical, with no distinguishing marks. I knew it was wrong to go any further. This was a breach of privacy, and I'd promised myself I'd never cross that line. But something in me wouldn't stop. I had to know. What was Amelia hiding? I sat down at the kitchen table, the stack of diaries in front of me, and stared at them. The thought struck me that all the locks might use the same key. It seemed worth a try. I didn't have Amelia's key, but I could get one. Curiosity pushed me to action. Grabbing the phone book, I flipped through its pages until I found the number for Cum Specialties. It was already 8:35 p.m., and I wasn't sure if they'd still be open, but many downtown stores stayed open late on Wednesdays. After 2 rings, a young woman answered. "Cum Specialties, how can I help you?" she said, her voice warm and polite. I cleared my throat, keeping my tone casual. "Hi, I'm looking for a red leather diary. About 6 by 8 inches? It's for a gift." "Oh, I think I know what you're referring to. Let me check." She put the phone down, and I waited, tapping my fingers on the table. After about 3 minutes, she returned. "Yes, we have 2 in stock. We're open until 10 o'clock if you'd like to stop by." Relief swept over me. "Great, thanks. I'll be there soon." I didn't waste any time. Grabbing my coat, I headed out the door and drove to the store. By 9 p.m., I was on my way home with a new red leather diary and a key in my bag. The diary had cost $60, but I didn't care. If this key worked, it would be a small price to pay for the truth. On the drive home, I thought about the possibility of giving Amelia the new diary as a gift. It would cover my tracks if she ever noticed a difference in her stack. But as I imagined her opening it, her eyes lighting up with gratitude, I felt a pang of guilt. This wasn't just about her journal anymore. It was about the secrets she kept. Secrets I was starting to feel desperate to uncover. Like the time she had hidden her plans for a seminar from me for weeks, only to casually mention it last minute. She had a habit of keeping things to herself. And now, I was starting to wonder just how much she had hidden. Amelia had always been private, sometimes to the point of secrecy. Once, she concealed an abnormal Pap test result, only telling me weeks later when the issue resolved itself. That memory gnawed at me now. Was she hiding another health scare? Workplace stress? But then, a darker thought crept in. One I didn't want to entertain but couldn't fully push away. What if she was having an affair? I shook my head, rejecting the idea outright. Couldn't be true. Despite our physical differences, her tall and elegant frame against my shorter, more rugged build, we had something real. We'd known each other since high school. We dated briefly back then, parted ways, and reunited years later when she was in college. After her graduation, we'd married quickly, driven by love and a shared vision for our future. I'd built a life for us, becoming a master electrician, buying our first home, and planning for something bigger. We'd even talked about starting a family, agreeing that Amelia would stop taking birth control by the end of the school year. The thought of betrayal felt impossible. Yet, as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of her journals, I couldn't shake the unease creeping over me. The new diary's key rested in my hand, still in its tiny envelope. It looked too small to fit the locks on Amelia's journals. I cursed myself for not asking the store clerk about compatibility. If this key didn't fit, I'd have to abandon my plan. There was no way I'd go hunting for Amelia's hidden keys. That would raise too many red flags. Minutes later, I sat at the table, the stack of diaries in front of me, wrestling with my next move. My worry for her well-being battled with the fear of violating her trust. But my relentless curiosity won out. I had to know what was going on. With a deep breath, I inserted the key into the lock on her current journal. To my surprise, it turned effortlessly. The latch clicked open, and the small leather book lay exposed in my hands. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning her neat handwriting. It didn't take long before I found entries from just the day before. As I read, my stomach dropped. My face went pale, and tears blurred my vision. I felt an ache in my chest, like something had caved in. I moved to the kitchen sink, gripping the soda can in my hand so tightly that it overflowed onto my arm. The sticky mess jolted me back to reality, and I quickly cleaned it up. But the damage was already done. I carried the diaries into the living room, placed them on the end table, and turned on the lamp. Settling into my chair, I stared at the stack, bracing myself to uncover the truth. Not just about Amelia, but about our life together. I couldn't start with the most recent entry. Not yet. Whatever I'd read had shaken me to my core, but I needed the full story. So, I opened the first journal and began reading from the very beginning. The first entry, dated early June, was filled with reflections on her life. Amelia wrote about her contentment with her career, her pride in her accomplishments, and her gratitude for our marriage. At first, it was reassuring, like I was reconnecting with the woman I'd loved for so long. But as I progressed, the entries began to shift. By early September, I found something that stopped me cold. I read it once, then again. On September 8th, Amelia had written about meeting her new teaching assistant, Marcos Turner. She described him in a way that made my stomach twist. Slightly taller than me, dark hair, sharp features, and a quick wit. Her words were flattering, almost admiring. She mentioned how effortlessly he had taken to his duties, praising his intelligence and humor. But it wasn't what she said about his abilities that got to me. It was the way she described him. There was an intimacy to her tone, a familiarity that felt too close, too personal. I kept reading, my heart pounding as I pieced together her growing connection to Marcos. Marcos Turner. His name kept cropping up, threaded through Amelia's life in a way that made my chest tighten. At first, her entries about him seemed innocent enough, clinical, even. On September 8th, she described him as slightly taller than her, with dark hair, piercing eyes, and a short beard. She'd noted his impressive qualifications and his knack for handling students' questions. But as I read further, Marcos wasn't just a footnote anymore. He was everywhere. By September 15th, Amelia was writing about how invaluable Marcos was in managing her oversized class of over 100 students. He answers questions while I prepare materials, she wrote, adding an almost offhand comment about how female students seemed drawn to him. He reminds me of a young Leonardo DiCaprio, she joked. The tone felt light, but something about it stuck with me. Then came September 20th. Classes are progressing as expected. A few students have dropped due to the difficulty of the coursework. Marcos sits in the front row during lectures, watching me intently. I'll give him more responsibilities next week. I frowned, rereading that line. Watching her intently, I kept going, my unease growing with each page. On September 24th, Amelia described working on a reading assignment when Marcos stopped by her office to help. She also mentioned something that felt like a punch to the gut, her intention to bring up having children with me. It was the first time the subject of starting a family appeared in her journal. I'd been waiting for that moment for months, but reading about it here, buried among notes about her assistant, felt hollow. By September 30th, she had noticed something unsettling. Marcos's constant attention during lectures is becoming noticeable. Even when I shoot him disapproving glances, he keeps staring. Female students still flock to him with questions after class. They seem more interested in him than in me. Despite her unease about Marcos's behavior, she seemed pleased with her students' progress. Her entries painted a picture of someone juggling the pressures of her first year as a full professor while being proud of her accomplishments. Then the entries shifted again. On October 8th, Amelia had written about sharing our plan to start a family with Marcos. I told him Liam and I planned to start trying for a baby after this school year. She wrote, her excitement palpable. His reaction. He smiled, congratulated me, and said it was a wonderful decision. His support felt genuine and I appreciated it, maybe too much. We hugged. Briefly. I reminded him to maintain professionalism. My grip on the journal tightened. Why the hell was she sharing something so personal with him? Then came October 10th. Marcos visited my office today. During our discussion, he locked the door. I immediately told him to unlock it, and he complied without hesitation. Still, it left me feeling uneasy. What was he thinking? Uneasy? The knot in my stomach tightened. I could feel my heart racing as I turned the page. On October 11th, Marcos returned to her office. He apologized for his behavior the day before, mentioning his preference for mature women and how much he admired her. Amelia's response made my blood run cold. Though I'm happily married, I found his attention flattering. It's strange. His interest in me over the younger women at the college intrigues me. Intrigues her? By October 13th, Amelia's tone had changed completely. I look forward to Marcos's visits now, but he didn't show up today. I felt disappointed. 2 days later, she wrote about hoping he'd stay after her office hours. I wanted to talk more about his comment on mature women, but he left before I could. The entries left me reeling. My breathing was shallow, my head spinning as I tried to piece together what I just read. It wasn't just her words, it was the tone. Amelia wasn't just recording observations about her teaching assistant. There was something more, something deeper. A line had been crossed, even if she didn't want to admit it. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. What the hell was happening between my wife and this man? October 16th marked the point where everything seemed to tilt further into chaos. Amelia wrote about finally speaking with Marcos after his previous comments. He explained that his preference for mature women came from past experiences, something that clearly troubled her. She admitted she regretted not setting clearer boundaries. Reading those words made my stomach churn. Her reaction wasn't what I'd expected. Not anger, not outrage, but hesitation. It felt like she was caught in some twisted limbo, unsure of what to do. I left the diary open on the table and grabbed another soda from the fridge. My hand was shaking as I popped the tab, the cold fizz spilling over the edge. I wiped it off, sat back down, and kept reading. October 20th was worse. Amelia described how, just before leaving work, Marcos barged into her office. He ignored her request to leave the door open, brushing it off like it didn't matter. Then, he confessed he'd been thinking about her constantly and asked for a kiss. Claiming it was his birthday, she felt uneasy but agreed, hoping it would make him leave. Later, she realized his birthday was in July. She'd been tricked, and yet, instead of being furious, she laughed it off in her journal. She wrote that she was worried about his intentions and resolved to be more cautious around him. But as I read those words, all I could feel was anger. At Marcos, at her, at the entire situation spiraling further out of control. The next entry was quieter. Marcos was absent as Amelia focused on grading tests and essays. It struck me as odd, his sudden disappearance from her orbit. But the journal didn't explain why. Then came October 30th, and the words on the page made my blood run cold. Today, something happened that's hard for me to explain, she began. My hands gripped the edges of the journal as I read on. Marcos came into my office, locked the door behind him, and pulled me toward him before I could protest. I felt ashamed for not stopping him sooner. When I finally pushed him away, he insisted I enjoyed it. I asked him to leave, but he smirked and said he'd see me tomorrow. I'm struggling to handle this situation. I feel trapped and unsure if I should tell Liam. Worse, I can't stop thinking about Marcos. I read the entry over and over, each time feeling the rage build inside me like a storm I couldn't contain. My breathing grew shallow, my vision blurring with the fury I didn't know I was capable of. How could she let this happen? How could she not tell me? How could she not shut this down the moment it started? Then came November 2nd, and with it, another dagger to the chest. I finally stopped worrying about Liam noticing anything unusual. The first night was tough, but he didn't suspect a thing. Despite my anxiety, it made me realize how easy it is to keep secrets from him. The words burned like acid, each one cutting deeper than the last. She wasn't just hiding things from me. She was calculating, manipulating, taking advantage of the trust one had in her. November 6th was no better. It's been days since I was alone with Marcos. Even when he's in class, he still stares at me, making me feel uneasy. I wonder how I'll react if he comes to my office again. 2 days later, she wrote about him visiting her office again. Others were present this time, but that didn't stop him. He kissed me quickly before leaving, she wrote. It made me uncomfortable. Despite that, I'm considering attending a seminar series in Columbus after the new year. By November 9th, the entries turned gut-wrenching. Yesterday was another difficult day. Marcos's behavior is getting worse, and I'm starting to worry about how this will end if I don't do something soon. Despite trying to focus on work, Marcos managed to enter my office unnoticed. When he tried to kiss me, I hesitated before briefly giving in. Regaining my composure, I pushed him away. But the moment lingers. I slammed the journal shut, my hands trembling with rage and disbelief. This wasn't just about Marcos anymore. It was about Amelia, her choices, her actions, her complicity. She let this man invade her space, her thoughts, and her boundaries. She didn't just let it happen. She participated. I leaned back in the chair, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing with questions I wasn't sure I wanted the answers to. How long had this been going on? How deep did it go? And why the hell hadn't she told me the truth? One thing was clear. This wasn't just Marcos's fault. Amelia had crossed a line, and now I was the one left to pick up the pieces. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Amelia's entries were like a slow-motion car crash, each one dragging me deeper into a nightmare I hadn't seen coming. November 17th hit me like a brick. I'm caught in a confusing situation. Marcos's hold over me is stronger than I thought. I can't tell if it's his demeanor or my own vulnerability, but I feel powerless around him. This afternoon, I confronted him about our previous encounters, stressing how inappropriate it was given my marriage and our professional relationship. Despite my firm stance, he suggested we lock the office door and invited me to sit with him on the couch. For reasons I can't explain, I agreed. We crossed a dangerous line, and now I'm torn between wanting to fire him and justifying our actions. I can never confess to Liam, and I'm relieved our indiscretions are hidden in the privacy of my office. I need to pull myself together before going home. My hand trembled as I read and reread that passage, my stomach churning with anger and disgust. She agreed to lock the door. She sat with him, and then she had the audacity to come home, act normal, and talk to me like nothing had happened. This wasn't just Marcos manipulating her. Amelia was complicit. She had choices, and she'd made them. My mind raced as I flipped through the pages, desperate to find some explanation, some excuse for why my wife had betrayed me so deeply. The clock ticked past 2 a.m., but I couldn't stop. I grabbed my phone and left a voicemail at work, saying I wouldn't be available due to personal reasons. I wasn't going to let this go. Not until I had the full story. The next entry was dated November 22nd. Marcos stopped by the office today, but I kept my distance, staying behind my desk. He behaved appropriately and didn't try to lock the door. My guilt kept me from engaging with him. I think he sensed my determination to keep things professional. I hope I can stick to this resolve. I scoffed bitterly, shaking my head. Resolve? She had already crossed every line imaginable. And now she wanted to act like she was setting boundaries? Her upbeat mood in that entry felt like a slap in the face. Then came November 23rd. I remembered this day clearly. It was the day Amelia told me about the seminars in Columbus. I'd been supportive, even offering to go with her. Reading her journal now, it was clear how little I'd known about the web of lies she'd been spinning. By November 25th, things had escalated again. Marcos visited my office today. He wanted to come to our home, but I firmly said no and emphasized it wasn't an option. He asked if I'd meet him somewhere else, and I refused again. I feel like I'm barely holding things together. He knows too much about me, and I can't tell Liam. Not now, not ever. I just need to get through the semester without any more mistakes. I gritted my teeth, my jaw aching from the pressure. Marcos wanted to come to our home, to invade the life I'd built with Amelia. And instead of shutting him down completely, she entertained the conversation. She'd refused, yes, but her tone in the journal wasn't one of disgust or outrage. It was one of fear of exposure, not fear for me. As the entries moved toward December, I could see the cracks forming in her resolve. Her words hinted at a woman unraveling, trapped between guilt and whatever connection she thought she had with Marcos. Each page felt like another stab to the chest. The Amelia I thought I knew, my Amelia, was slipping away, replaced by someone I barely recognized. By the time I closed the journal, my mind was racing, my emotions a storm of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. Just 8 hours ago, I'd been chatting with her on the phone, laughing about her misplaced travel bag, completely oblivious to the truth of what she'd been hiding. Now I couldn't look at her or our life together the same way. Each entry brought new layers of betrayal, lies, and a growing sense of dread. As I read Amelia's words from November 30th, I couldn't reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the one pouring her deepest thoughts into these journals. Yesterday was awful. I feel so lost. I couldn't sleep, and Liam noticed I was upset. I wish I could tell him, but I can't find the words. Marcos haunts my dreams. Even though I don't have feelings for him, I'm tormented by our encounters. When he locked the door, I stood there, unable to stop him, even though my mind was screaming at me to do something. After he left, I cried and felt so much regret. I stayed locked in my office all day, wrestling with my thoughts. Maybe I need therapy. I clenched my fists, my knuckles whitening. Therapy? Was that her solution to all of this? She didn't need therapy. She needed to stop whatever game she was playing with this man. By December 3rd, things had spiraled even further. Marcos cornered me in the hallway today, asking me to reconsider meeting him at his place. He said he wanted to be close to me in a real bed. I refused, reminding him of the risks to my marriage and career. But he didn't give up. He suggested he come to the January seminars and even offered to pay his own way if I'd spend nights with him. I rejected him, but his words stuck with me. I questioned my own strength. I couldn't take it anymore. Slamming the journal shut, I stood up, pacing the living room as rage boiled inside me. My head swam with thoughts of Marcos, of Amelia, of all the lies she had fed me. She wasn't just a victim here. She was letting this happen. She was choosing to let it happen. I wanted to grab a drink, anything to dull the searing anger in my chest. But I stopped myself. I needed to think clearly. This wasn't the time to lose control. After a few minutes, I sat back down, breathing deeply as I opened the journal again. December 7th. Marcos stopped by my office to say goodbye before his Christmas trip. He has an exam tomorrow. He asked if he could come back early for the seminar, suggesting I could use it as a distraction. I told him to call me in a few days. Her next entry cut me to the core. Today I lied to Liam, convincing him to stay home while I attend a seminar. I suggested a cruise to distract him. He was hesitant but eventually agreed. I feel terrible about deceiving him. I haven't decided if I'll take Marcos with me, but I'm thinking about it. I keep reflecting on our last encounter in my office. Even though I'm happy with Liam, I can't stop thinking about Marcos. I'm waiting for his call, wondering if he'll keep pushing or give up. The lies, the manipulation. She had looked me in the eye and lied to my face, knowing full well what she was planning. My heart pounded in my chest, the betrayal sinking in deeper with each word. By December 12th, her resolve had clearly crumbled. Marcos called again, wanting to join me in Columbus. He suggested we book adjoining rooms and pretend he's my brother. He plans to confirm tomorrow and cover the costs. Now I have to decide if I'm going to betray Liam. I clenched the edges of the journal, nearly tearing the pages. She wasn't just toying with the idea. She was seriously considering it. December 14th was the final dagger. Marcos called again, excited about our stay at the Sharon. I made the reservation, feeling guilty. He's leaving after the spring semester, so he won't be my TA anymore. I hope I can resist the temptation. She hoped. This wasn't temptation. This was a premeditated betrayal, planned down to the damn hotel reservation. I slammed the journal shut again, my breath heaving, my mind spinning with fury and heartbreak. Amelia had lied to me, manipulated me, and now she was arranging for a romantic getaway with another man. I stared at the stack of journals, the evidence of her deceit. It was all there, written in her own hand. She'd betrayed me, and she wasn't even sure she wanted to stop. I couldn't stay in the living room anymore. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating me with the weight of everything I'd read. Carrying the journal with me, I stormed into the kitchen, pacing back and forth as I tried to figure out what to do. Confront her? Call her? Drive to Columbus and catch her in the act? My hands shook as I placed the journal on the counter and stared out the window into the darkness. One thing was clear. This wasn't just about Amelia's mistakes anymore. This was about how I was going to take back control of my life. Something about him intrigues me, Amelia had written in her December 28th entry. Something I've never felt before. I'm terrified of Liam finding out. It would destroy him. The words tore through me like shards of glass. I could feel my hands trembling as I gripped the edges of the journal. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the calculated nature of it. She knew what she was doing. She knew what it would do to me. And yet, she still allowed herself to be swept deeper into this twisted affair. Marcos called me at home yesterday, using a fake name in case Liam answered. He confirmed our plans for New Year's Eve, and I reluctantly agreed. Deep down, I felt a thrill. I hoped this encounter would end our affair for good. Liam has to work, giving me the chance to make arrangements. I've never spent consecutive nights with another man since I married Liam, but I decided to go along with Marcos's plan. Maybe this would disrupt my feelings for him. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 6 a.m. Exhaustion weighed on me, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. In the span of a single night, my entire world had crumbled. The love and trust I'd felt for Amelia, the foundation of our marriage, was buried under a mountain of lies and betrayal. I was nearing the end of her journals, but something inside me refused to stop. I needed to read every last word, to uncover every detail of her deception. I couldn't believe I was sitting here, questioning whether or not my wife had physically cheated on me yet. The fact that I didn't know for sure was unbearable. Leaving the last page unread for now, I got up to make some coffee, the bitter scent filling the kitchen as I tried to ground myself. I could rest later, after I finished piecing together the truth. By the time I returned to the living room, my hands warmed by the steaming mug, I reached the journal entry dated January 3rd. Tomorrow is the big day. I'm off for 3 days of seminars and nights with Marcos. I'll pick him up before leaving town and drop him off afterward. Thankfully, Liam didn't insist on coming along. I've got a map to make sure I find my way. I discovered a Victoria's Secret nearby and plan to buy outfits to wear for Marcos. It makes me uneasy, but I'll wash them before seeing Liam. I forgot to remind Marcos about contraceptives, but we can stop by the pharmacy before checking in. I'm surprisingly excited, though I worry about Marcos expecting new things. I'll save any new experiences for our cruise, framing it as an adventure. I've started packing and hope Liam won't suspect anything. I question if I can go through with it. What happened in my office was spontaneous, but this trip is planned. I could refuse and cover Marcos's expenses, but I'm already aroused at the thought. The mug slipped from my fingers, coffee splattering across the table as I sat there, stunned. Her words echoed in my mind like a haunting refrain, aroused at the thought. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This wasn't confusion or a lapse in judgment. She had planned it down to the smallest detail. The 7th journal lay closed before me now, its pages read, its secrets laid bare. 9 hours of unraveling my wife's betrayal had left me hollow, furious, and consumed by a new sense of clarity. Even if she backed out of her arrangement with Marcos, our marriage was over. The trust was gone. Forgiveness seemed impossible. But my anger? That wasn't aimed entirely at Amelia anymore. A new target had emerged. Marcos. My love for her was being replaced by something darker. A seething animosity toward the man who had invaded my life, my marriage, and my wife's thoughts. Before noon, I picked up the phone, my plan beginning to solidify. The number I found online led me to a cool, professional voice on the other end of the line. More investigations. How can I help you? Her tone, calm and composed, was a lifeline in the chaos of my thoughts. Do you handle divorce cases? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Yes, we do, she replied, her response clipped and efficient. Would you like to set up a consultation? Yes, I said, gripping the phone tightly. I'll need to act quickly, and I'll need information. There was a pause on the other end, then a quiet, understanding reply. We can handle that. Tell me what you need. I told her everything. For the first time in hours, I felt something resembling control returning to my life. I couldn't change what had already happened, but I could ensure that Amelia and Marcos's plans didn't play out the way they intended. And if there was one thing I was certain of, it was this: they wouldn't see me coming. I don't know if that's the right term, I admitted, my voice tight with unease. But I need someone who investigates cheating spouses. The woman's tone remained calm. If you mean investigating infidelity, yes, we can assist. Would you like to speak with an investigator? Yes, please, I replied, a small flicker of relief easing the knot in my chest. After a brief hold, a man's voice came on the line. It was firm, professional, and no nonsense. This is Oliver Moore. How can I assist you? I wasted no time. The details spilled out of me faster than I'd intended. I suspect my wife is having an affair with a man at the Sharon Hotel near the airport. I need photographic evidence, and I'd like a quote. The Sharon. We're familiar with it, Moore replied, his voice even. Is this ongoing? And what's your time frame? She's there until Saturday morning, I explained. She's in room 412, and the man she's with is in 414. They're adjoining rooms. I know they were there last night too, but I only decided to take action this morning. She's attending seminars, and he's accompanying her. Moore seemed to understand the urgency, his tone never wavering. Got it. I'll need more details on your surveillance preferences. Can you provide their names and descriptions? I described Amelia in as much detail as I could, offering to send a photo if needed. When it came to Marcos, I gave his full name and a vague description based on Amelia's journal. Slightly taller than her, dark hair, short beard. It was enough, I hoped. It's straightforward, Mr. Miller, Moore assured me. We can install cameras in both rooms this afternoon and monitor them until after checkout this weekend. Installation is quick, and we have access to the rooms at a fixed rate per entry. If you only need photographic evidence without ongoing monitoring, the cost is $800 flat. Wouldn't a single camera be cheaper? I asked, hesitant but trying to stay practical. I just need confirmation they're together. That's all. Unfortunately, no. We don't know which room they'll use, and access fees for maintenance workers are per room. The cost covers high-quality equipment and logistics, including installation and removal. His explanation was methodical, leaving no room for doubt. I'd prefer to check tonight and receive the photos by tomorrow evening, I added, my voice firmer as my plan began to take shape. That's doable, Moore replied. We'll use cameras in both rooms to ensure coverage. Hiring a maintenance worker for 2 entries, installation and removal, adds $100 to the cost. Apologies, I'm new to this, I muttered, embarrassed by my ignorance but determined to see it through. I'll pay up front by credit card on your website. Great. Go to our payment portal and note case number 1372A on the form. Once payment is confirmed, we'll install the cameras and provide you with the footage. Do you prefer delivery by mail or pickup? The thought of waiting for a DVD to arrive by mail felt agonizing. Could you hold on to the footage until I reach out? For now, I just need photos, nothing explicit. Just proof of the affair. Understood, Mr. Miller. I'll provide still images from the video feed for your review. Once captured, I'll notify you immediately. During the call, I provided my phone number, filled out the form on their website, and completed the payment. Moore confirmed the transaction with the same calm professionalism. We're arranging for camera installation now. I'll be in touch once we have results. When the call ended, I let out a long breath, tension still weighing on my shoulders but feeling the faintest hint of relief. A part of me dreaded what the photos would confirm, but I couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. For now, I allowed exhaustion to take over. I sank onto the couch, my body heavy from the weight of the past 12 hours. After a brief nap, I forced myself to eat a quick meal, knowing I needed to stay sharp for what lay ahead. As I sat in the quiet of the kitchen, the gravity of the situation settled over me like a storm cloud. In a few short hours, I would know the truth, no matter how devastating it might be. And once I had the proof, there would be no going back. I resumed reading Amelia's diaries, this time progressing quickly. I didn't linger over passages or reread anything, forcing myself to push through. The goal was clear. I needed to finish before the weight of her words consumed me again. Just before 10 p.m., my phone rang. It was Amelia. Our conversation was disturbingly smooth, both of us weaving around our respective secrets like skilled liars. She spoke about her day at the seminar, how exhausting but enlightening the presentations were. I nodded along, my responses clipped, careful to sound normal. I wondered if it was this easy for her to hide her plans as it was for me to conceal mine. With everything arranged for the surveillance and my own plans taking shape, I felt a strange sense of calm. But deep down, I doubted I'd ever feel a real sense of normalcy again. Before diving into the next journal volume, I double-checked my arrangements for Friday. Additional tasks loomed, chief among them a visit to the bank to sort out finances. I'd already resigned from Anderson Electric, a decision I hadn't made lightly, and was waiting for my final paycheck. It was well past 1 a.m. when I finished the second volume. I'd hoped to move faster, but thoughts of Amelia and Marcos haunted me at every turn. Exhausted, I lay down on the couch. To my surprise, I fell asleep. When I woke at 7 a.m., I felt strangely refreshed. After a quick breakfast, I dove back into the journals. By noon, I'd finished the third and fourth volumes, stacking them neatly to the side. It was time to tackle my to-do list. My first stop was Anderson Electric to collect my final paycheck and clear out my locker. Gus Anderson, the owner, met me with a furrowed brow. "You're really going through with this, huh?" he asked, trying to mask his disappointment. I nodded, my resolve unshakable. "I have to, Gus." He studied me for a moment before relenting. "All right, I won't push. But if you ever need a place, you know where to find us." "Thanks," I said, shaking his hand firmly. The paperwork at the bank took longer than I'd anticipated, but eventually, I walked out with a bag containing over $20,000. It wasn't as much as I'd hoped for, but it was all I could access immediately without Amelia's signature. I arrived home around 4 p.m., drained but determined. After setting the bag in a secure spot, I checked the answering machine. There was a message from More Investigations. Taking a deep breath, I dialed Oliver Moore's direct line. "This is Oliver Moore," he answered promptly. "How can I assist you?" "Hello, this is Liam Miller," I said, my voice tight. "Were you able to install the cameras? Do you have any findings?" "Yes, Mr. Miller. We set up cameras in both rooms yesterday afternoon and reviewed the footage today. Both rooms were empty during the operation, so it was a quick setup." My chest tightened as I hesitated, then asked the question I both dreaded and needed to ask. Did anything significant show up on the footage?" The pause on the other end felt like an eternity. Then, Oliver spoke, his tone calm but direct. "Well, Liam, your suspicions are confirmed. They spent the night together in your wife's room and were intimate multiple times." His words hit me like a freight train. My hand gripped the receiver, my knuckles turning white. I felt the blood drain from my face, my heartbeat roaring in my ears. "I've transferred the video to DVD," Oliver continued, his voice steady. "If you still want it, I can email you 3 frames as you requested." For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat felt dry, my mind a storm of emotions I couldn't sort through. Anger, betrayal, sadness. They all churned together, threatening to overwhelm me. "Liam?" Oliver prompted gently. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to respond. Yes, please. Send me the frames. I'll have them to you within the hour," he replied. "And if you need anything else, don't hesitate to reach out." The call ended, leaving me alone in the silence of the house. I slumped into a chair, staring at nothing as the truth sank in. Amelia hadn't just betrayed me. She had planned it, orchestrated every detail, and now I had the proof. There was no denying it anymore. Our marriage wasn't just strained, it was dead. The photos would arrive soon, but I didn't need to see them to know what they would confirm. The question now was no longer, what if? It was, what am I going to do about it? Oliver's words lingered in my ears long after the call ended, heavy and impossible to shake. The weight of what I'd learned, what I'd seen, pressed down on me like a sledgehammer, bringing tears to my eyes. I had already read the damning entries in Amelia's diaries, but seeing the visual evidence made it undeniably real. Yes, please send the pictures. Thank you, Mr. Moore. If everything is settled financially, I consider our business concluded, I said, my voice tight and strained. Yes, your payment covers everything, Oliver replied, a hint of concern creeping into his professional tone. Are you feeling all right? Your voice sounds different. This kind of situation can be emotionally overwhelming, and I'm concerned. I'm okay, I lied, swallowing hard. Thank you. I'll reach out if I need anything else. Your attorney may need a copy of the DVD, Oliver added gently. Unless you're pursuing grounds other than infidelity for the divorce, it's good to have everything documented. We keep the footage for a year or until instructed otherwise. Also, if I may, a word of advice. Many clients in your situation find therapy beneficial. While it's not my area of expertise, a good therapist can make a significant difference in processing this kind of trauma. Thank you for your help, Mr. Moore. I have a plan to cope with this, I replied, my voice steadier now. I appreciate your professionalism. Without waiting for further discussion, I ended the call. I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly ahead, my thoughts a swirling mess of emotions. The silence in the room felt deafening until the faint chime of an incoming email broke through, snapping me back to reality. Quietly, I walked to the computer and opened the email from More Investigations. Attached were 3 photos, each one more damning than the last. My stomach churned as I clicked through them. The first photo showed Amelia and Marcos in her hotel room, sitting close together on the edge of the bed, their body language intimate. The second showed them in the same room, standing close, their hands brushing as they spoke. But it was the third photo that hit the hardest. They were lying together under a sheet, their expressions peaceful, as if the destruction of my marriage was nothing more than a footnote in their day. I printed the photos on 8 by 10 paper, the stark clarity of the images making my hands tremble. Holding the evidence in my hands made it all tangible, undeniable. The third photo, in particular, marked a turning point for me emotionally. After one last look, I slipped the photos into a brown envelope and placed it on the kitchen table. I sat down again, forcing myself to return to the 5th diary. The hours passed in a haze as I consumed the final volumes of Amelia's journals. Her words were a strange mix of the familiar and the alien. She had adhered so closely to my perceptions of her. Her actions with Marcos felt even more baffling. There were insights I hadn't expected, layers of insecurity I hadn't known she struggled with, doubts she had buried beneath her confident exterior. But what stood out the most was her professed love for me, repeated throughout the pages. Her love made her betrayal all the more confusing. The biggest revelation, though, wasn't about Marcos. It was about us. The diary revealed that our first meeting at a birthday party hadn't been a coincidence. Amelia had orchestrated it, eager to reconnect with me after years apart. She had planned everything down to the smallest detail. That knowledge added another layer to the heartbreak. What once felt like serendipity now felt calculated. Engrossed in the reading, I hadn't realized how late it had become. Midnight had long passed, and the house was dark and eerily quiet. Amelia hadn't called, not even to check in. My stomach growled, and I finally tore myself away long enough to make a sandwich. But even as I ate, the thoughts of Amelia and Marcos consumed me, their interactions playing on an endless loop in my mind. The decision to end the marriage felt more solid than ever. That night I barely slept. Whether it was the food, the vivid images of Amelia and Marcos together, or the sheer weight of what I'd uncovered, I couldn't say. All I knew was that the life I'd built was over, and now it was up to me to decide how to dismantle it. By 7 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep. My mind was restless, filled with an endless loop of everything I had discovered and the choices that now lay ahead. There was no peace to be found in my thoughts, only the relentless need to see my meticulously planned day through. By 8:30 a.m., I made a phone call to my closest surviving relative, my brother Michael. We weren't estranged, but we didn't talk often, our interactions usually limited to holiday gatherings or family events. 2 weeks ago, Michael, his wife Evelyn, and their kids, Hank and Luna, had visited us for Christmas. Michael answered on the second ring, his tone warm but surprised by the unexpected morning call. "Liam? Everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's fine," I lied, forcing calm into my voice. "Just thought I'd drop by, spend some time with you and the family if you're free." Michael didn't press, and by slightly past 10 a.m., I was at his home. Hank and Luna were thrilled to see me, immediately resuming their play with the new toys they'd received for Christmas. Evelyn brewed fresh coffee, and Michael and I sat at the kitchen table, reminiscing about our recent holiday gathering. The conversation drifted to Michael's upcoming spring break trip to Disneyland with his family. I'd remembered their plans from our Christmas conversations and had brought something with me, a small gesture to distract myself from the heaviness of the day. I handed each of Michael's kids a crisp $100 bill. Their eyes lit up, and their smiles were genuine. Their enthusiastic hugs were a small, fleeting comfort in an otherwise bleak day. "You really didn't have to do that, Liam," Michael said, studying me with concern. "But it was kind of you. The kids are over the moon." I gave a faint smile. "No, I didn't win the lottery. I just felt like doing something nice." We sipped coffee and made small talk. Evelyn eventually joined us, settling into a chair across from me. Her tone was light as she said, "I suppose I can't avoid mentioning your plans with Amelia. She told us you're thinking about starting a family. I know you'll make great parents." Her words hit me harder than I'd expected. A pang of sadness twisted in my chest, and I paused for a moment before replying. "She shared that with you, huh? Women don't seem to hold much back." Before Evelyn could say more, I quickly changed the subject. "So, Michael, how's work at the restaurant?" The shift in topic was deliberate, and Evelyn seemed to pick up on it. She let the conversation flow naturally, but I could see the flicker of curiosity in her eyes as she studied me. When the coffee cups were empty, I stood up and said my goodbyes. "Just in case I don't see you until next Christmas, take care of yourselves," I said, shaking Michael's hand and giving Evelyn a quick hug. "I'll keep you in my thoughts," I added, walking to my car. As I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder what Michael and Evelyn were thinking. Inside the house, Michael turned to Evelyn. "I wonder what's on his mind." He seemed preoccupied. Evelyn shrugged, her tone dismissive. "Probably just waiting for Amelia to get back from her seminar. She said she'd be back tonight." Hand in hand, they walked back inside, discussing their plans for the rest of the day. Amelia returned home just before 6 p.m. As she stepped inside, she noticed immediately that I wasn't there. Relief and disappointment mingled in her expression. She had rehearsed our reunion in her mind during the drive, prepared for the tension that might linger in the air. My absence threw her off balance. Taking advantage of the quiet, she began unpacking her things and sorting the laundry. When she entered the kitchen, her gaze fell on a note pinned under the salt shaker on the counter. It was from me. In my handwriting, simple and to the point, it read, "Amelia, had to leave for work unexpectedly. Back late. Let's talk tomorrow. Liam." Amelia set the note down, her hands trembling slightly. She couldn't tell if she felt relieved or uneasy. She folded the note and placed it in her pocket before heading back to her tasks, trying to distract herself from the guilt gnawing at her. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Although disappointed by my absence, the note allowed Amelia to continue with her evening as planned. It gave her the space she needed to decompress, to carry on without facing the potential tension she had anticipated. Heading upstairs, she decided on a relaxing bath instead of a quick shower. While gathering laundry, she spotted her journal sitting innocently on the dresser. A wave of relief swept over her. It was still there. She distinctly remembered packing it in her emergency bag. Originally, she had planned to update it during the trip, but with everything that had transpired, she hadn't gotten around to it. My casual reminder before her departure had jogged her memory. Amelia retrieved the journal, deciding to write while the laundry ran. After tossing her clothes into the washer, she made herself a quick meal. She tried calling me, only to discover that my phone was sitting in its usual spot in the wicker basket by the door. She sighed, realizing she wouldn't be able to reach me. It was another small relief, one less immediate confrontation to worry about. Returning to the table, she unlocked her journal with the tiny key she kept tucked in her wallet. She flipped it open to a blank page and began writing, her thoughts pouring out in a steady stream. January 7th. The most eventful 4 days of my life just ended, and I need to write everything down, even the unpleasant parts. When I picked up Marcos on Tuesday, he seemed eager. During the drive, he made advances that bothered me, but he stopped after I warned him. As we got farther from the city, I started to relax. At the mall, he joined me at Victoria's Secret, suggesting items I ended up buying. I wore one set for him Wednesday night but disposed of it before leaving the store this morning. I've decided to discard the other sets too. I don't want reminders of my time at the Sharon. I can't erase the memories, but I'll try to move on. On Wednesday night, Marcos came to my room, and we quickly ended up in bed. After that, I understood the vast difference between physical desire and genuine love. I ended things with Marcos, but he didn't take it well. Despite my attempts to avoid conflict, he became angry. We agreed to sleep on it, but I had already started planning how to make amends with Liam. Friday morning, Marcos ignored my refusal and persisted. I locked the connecting door between our rooms, but that didn't stop him from making plans with someone else that night. Witnessing him with another woman, I realized he preys on vulnerable women like me. It was a relief not to argue with him, but I felt ashamed for falling into his trap. I dreaded the ride home with Marcos, but it surprisingly went smoothly. Seeing him for who he truly was gave me control over our interaction. He behaved decently and accepted my decision to end things. As we drove, I resolved to seek therapy to understand and overcome my vulnerability to him. I'm determined to ensure I never betray Liam again. I've also committed to making amends with him, even if he never learns the truth. Additionally, I've decided to stop taking birth control and embrace the possibility of having children. Amelia let out a shaky breath as she finished her lengthy entry. Satisfied with her resolve, she used her pen as a bookmark and left the journal on the table. Her thoughts felt clearer now, as if confessing them on paper had lifted some of the burden from her chest. She headed upstairs to prepare her bath, unaware that her carefully written thoughts, her confession of betrayal, were now at the center of a storm she couldn't yet see. Amelia stood frozen in the kitchen, staring at the note I had left. The words felt different now, ominous in their simplicity. Amelia had to leave for work unexpectedly. Back late. Let's talk tomorrow. Liam. Her grip on the paper tightened as the detective's words echoed in her mind. The call was traced to your husband's cell phone. A homicide report? It didn't make sense. Liam wasn't violent. He wasn't capable of something like that. At least that's what she thought. Her knees felt weak as she sank into the chair at the table. She stared blankly at the coffee mug still sitting in front of her, the steam long gone. A cold chill crawled down her spine. Her journal lay open, its pages filled with her raw confessions from the past few days. The timeline was damning. The lies, the betrayal, the man she had let into her life. Marcos. Her stomach twisted in knots. What if the homicide was connected to him? She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over the chair. Pacing the room, she clutched the detective's card in one hand and my note in the other. Her mind raced. What if Liam found out about Marcos? What if the homicide was tied to her affair? Her thoughts spiraled as she pieced together the worst-case scenario. What if Liam knew everything? Meanwhile, I sat alone in my car, parked in a secluded lot, the envelope with the photos sitting on the passenger seat. The weight of everything I'd learned, and everything I'd planned, pressed heavily on me. Detective Robinson and Officer Clark were doing their part, following up on the report I had filed. I knew exactly what they'd find when they dug deeper, and I knew exactly what Amelia would be thinking right now. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about closure. The plan was meticulous, every detail accounted for. Marcos had been a mistake for Amelia, and he'd underestimated what that mistake would cost him. I pulled my phone from my pocket, staring at the screen. The battery was nearly dead, but I didn't care. Amelia had tried calling earlier. The missed calls stared back at me, along with a few texts asking where I was. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned my attention back to the photos, sliding one out of the envelope. The image of Amelia and Marcos lying together under the sheets stared back at me. I felt no tears this time, no sadness, just a simmering rage and a strange sense of clarity. This was the turning point. I picked up the burner phone I'd purchased the day before, dialed a number, and waited for the call to connect. "It's done," I said simply when Oliver Moore answered. "Understood, Mr. Miller," he replied. "Anything else you need from us?" "Not for now. Thank you." I ended the call and placed the burner phone back in the glove compartment. The time was coming soon. Amelia would have no choice but to face what she'd done. Back at the house, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The candles she'd lit earlier flickered on the counter, casting unsettling shadows across the walls. She returned to the kitchen table, her journal lying open to the latest entry. Her confession stared back at her, taunting her with its honesty. She wanted to tear the pages out, burn them, erase the evidence of what she had done. But it was too late for that. The knock at the door came suddenly, startling her so badly that she nearly dropped the journal. Her heart raced as she walked cautiously to the front door, her steps slow and hesitant. Through the peephole, she saw me standing there. Her breath caught in her throat as she unlocked the door and pulled it open. "Liam," she said, her voice trembling. "You're home." I stepped inside, closing the door behind me with deliberate calm. My eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, she noticed something different, something cold and resolute. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady, though the anger beneath it was unmistakable. Amelia's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked at me as though searching for answers, trying to gauge what I knew, how much I had pieced together. I walked past her into the kitchen, setting the envelope of photos on the table with a deliberate thud. "Sit down," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. Amelia hesitated but obeyed, her hands trembling as she sat across from me. I slid the envelope across the table, my gaze never leaving hers. "Open it." Her fingers fumbled as she pulled out the photos, her face draining of color as she looked at them. She covered her mouth with one hand, her eyes wide with shock and horror. "Liam," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I interrupted sharply. "Don't lie to me again. Not now." The silence between us was deafening. Amelia's tears spilled over, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no desire to comfort her. "Do you understand what you've done?" I asked, my voice cold and unwavering. She nodded slowly, her words caught in her throat. "You thought you could keep this from me. Hide it, bury it, and move on like nothing happened," I continued. "But now we both know the truth. So tell me, Amelia, what are you going to do about it?" Amelia's voice trembled as she cut in. "Liam could never do something like that. You've made a mistake. He's not capable of that kind of violence." Detective Robinson's calm expression didn't waver. "I understand this is difficult to hear, Mrs. Miller, but the evidence speaks for itself. The call reporting Mr. Turner's death came from your husband's cell phone. The scene suggests a deliberate act, and your husband's connection to Mr. Turner appears stronger than you've indicated." Amelia's head spun, her breathing shallow as the detective's words sank in. Marcos was dead. Not just dead, killed. And somehow Liam was connected to it. She clenched her hands together, fighting to keep control. "There must be some other explanation," she said weakly. He was my assistant, nothing more. Liam didn't even know about him." Detective Robinson's sharp gaze lingered on her. "Nothing more?" he asked, his voice measured. "You seemed quite startled when I mentioned his name. Are you sure there wasn't more to your relationship with Mr. Turner?" Amelia's throat tightened. She could feel the weight of his suspicion pressing down on her, and the truth clawing its way to the surface. She tried to steady her voice. "We worked together. That's all," she said firmly, though she could hear the shakiness in her own words. The detective leaned back slightly, his notebook in hand. "Let's go over this carefully, Mrs. Miller. You said you brought Mr. Turner home with you yesterday at 5:30 p.m. Is that correct?" "Yes," she whispered, And what happened after that? Did he leave? Did you drop him off somewhere? Amelia hesitated, the moments replaying in her mind. Marcos had been difficult on the ride home, pressing her to revisit their arrangement, even after she told him it was over. He'd been agitated, insistent, but eventually he seemed to back down. She'd thought the worst was behind her when she dropped him off at his apartment. He asked me for a ride to his place, she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. I dropped him off there. That was the last I saw him. Where exactly was that? The detective asked. His apartment, it's on 5th Street. I don't know the exact address, but I could show you. The detective made another note, his expression unreadable. We'll verify that, Mrs. Miller. But it's unusual for someone to report a homicide they didn't witness. The call came from your husband's phone, reporting Mr. Turner's death and providing the address where we found his body. Are you absolutely certain your husband didn't know him? Amelia shook her head, panic bubbling up inside her. I don't know how he could have. Liam's been busy with work and he wouldn't. Her voice faltered. The detective leaned forward slightly, his tone softening. Mrs. Miller, I need you to be honest with me. If there's something you're not telling us, now is the time. Were you and Mr. Turner involved in any way that might have given your husband a motive? Her stomach dropped, and a cold sweat broke out across her skin. She wanted to scream, to deny everything, but the weight of her guilt and the detective's relentless questioning were too much. She stammered, tears spilling over her cheeks. I made a mistake. Marcos and there was something. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, and it's over now. But Liam doesn't know about it. Detective Robinson exchanged a glance with Officer Clark, his expression hardening. So, you're saying your husband didn't know about the affair? Yes, she said, her voice barely audible. I swear he didn't. The silence that followed was deafening. Detective Robinson let her words hang in the air for a long moment before standing. We'll continue to look into this, Mrs. Miller, he said, his tone brisk. If your husband contacts you, please call us immediately. We'll need to speak with him directly. Amelia nodded weakly, her body trembling as she clutched the edge of the table for support. As the officers left, she locked the door behind them and stood there for a moment, her mind racing. What the hell is going on? She turned back toward the kitchen, her eyes falling on the journal she'd left open on the table. Her breath hitched as she stared at the words she had written the night before. Words that now felt like a confession she hadn't realized she was making. Amelia stumbled to the counter and gripped the edge tightly, her knuckles white. A horrifying thought clawed its way into her mind. Did Liam know? Could he have done this? Because of me? That's not who he is, Amelia repeated weakly, her voice breaking. Her tears slowed, replaced by a simmering anger. She looked up at Detective Robinson, her eyes red and swollen. Liam couldn't have done something like this. The detective, unaffected by her insistence, glanced at his notes and spoke firmly. According to state records, your husband has a permit for a .25 caliber semi-automatic pistol. One of the bullets found at the scene matches this caliber, tentatively linking it to his weapon. The motive, however, remains unclear. He rummaged through the folder he carried and placed 3 photocopies on the table in front of her. These are copies of photos found at the crime scene, he explained, his tone measured but sharp. Their positioning suggests Mr. Turner was shown them before he died. Blood splatter patterns indicate they were present at the time of the fatal shot. Amelia stared at the photocopies, her expression shifting from shock to horror as she examined them. Her trembling hand reached for the pages, flipping them over one by one. Each photo was damning. A picture of Amelia and Marcos at Victoria's Secret, seemingly taken without their knowledge. A shot of them entering the Sharon Hotel together, her hand resting lightly on his arm. A close-up of them in what appeared to be a hotel room, their faces dangerously close. No, Amelia whispered, her voice cracking as the realization hit her. Her hands shook as she gripped the edges of the photos. Tears spilled over as she began to sob uncontrollably. No, Liam couldn't have known. He couldn't have known. Detective Robinson folded his arms, his gaze piercing. I don't believe you've been entirely truthful about your connection with Marcos Turner or your husband's involvement with him, he said bluntly. Before Amelia could respond, the detective's phone rang. He answered it immediately, his tone brisk. Robinson here. Amelia sat frozen, her sobs quieting as she watched him. He remained mostly silent during the 3-minute call, occasionally jotting notes in his notebook. When he ended the call, he turned back to her, his expression unreadable. Your husband's call was traced to Windsor, Ontario, he began. Local authorities worked with the cell phone provider to locate the device. It was found in a bag, along with credit cards and a .25 caliber pistol registered to him. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. The bag was discovered in a trash bin at a Walmart parking lot. Neither your husband nor his vehicle was spotted, but plates matching his car were also found in the trash. Authorities believe he might have swapped plates to blend in with Ontario traffic. The room seemed to tilt as Amelia tried to process the information. Windsor, she whispered, her mind spinning. He's in Canada? Robinson nodded. It's possible. If he's still there, we'll coordinate with local authorities. But as of now, there's no indication of recent criminal activity in the area. The news offered no consolation. Amelia sat with her hands covering her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. Guilt, confusion, and terror swirled within her, making it impossible to think clearly. Detective Robinson pulled another photocopy from his folder and slid it across the table. We found this key at the scene, he said. Do you recognize it? Amelia looked up slowly, her eyes red and swollen. She examined the image, which depicted a small brass key alongside a ruler for scale. Her heart sank as recognition dawned. Her hands fumbled as she retrieved her purse, rifling through its contents until she pulled out a matching key from her wallet. She held it up next to the photocopy, her face draining of all color. Her voice came out as a broken whisper. Diary. Liam. The connection hit her like a lightning bolt. He must have read it. Every damning word, every confession. He knew. Amelia collapsed into the chair, her body shaking as she muttered incoherently. Detective Robinson and Officer Clark stayed with her for nearly 15 minutes, offering her water and urging her to call someone for support. Eventually, they persuaded her to contact her sister, who promised to arrive as soon as possible. As the two men left the house, the air was heavy with unspoken tension. They walked toward their vehicles, their conversation low and measured. You think we'll catch him soon? Officer Clark asked, glancing over his shoulder at the house. Detective Robinson sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. It depends on how well he can stay hidden. He hasn't committed any crimes in Canada for the past 2 weeks, so the local authorities might not prioritize his search. If he keeps his head down and remains undetected, his chances of being caught diminish over time. Clark frowned. But if he was calculated enough to leave his bag and plates behind, he's got a plan. Guys like that don't stay quiet for long. Robinson nodded grimly. You're right. And if he went to all this trouble for Turner, it's not just about running. He's got unfinished business. Detective Robinson's gaze was steely as he stopped mid-step, turning to face Clark. Think about it. Liam Miller had just killed someone. The only reason he'd come back home, as far as I can see, is to kill her, and maybe himself. Something must have changed his mind. I doubt he came back just for the phone. Clark's brow furrowed as the weight of the statement settled in. But if that's the case, why not confront her? Why leave the note instead? Feels calculated. Calculated, yes, Robinson replied, his voice low. But that doesn't mean rational. He could have come home with one plan and left with another. Maybe seeing her asleep, or something else in the house, triggered a change. It happens more often than you'd think. Clark nodded slowly, glancing back at the quiet house behind them. If you're right, Mrs. Miller is lucky to be alive. She'll realize that eventually. And when she does, he trailed off, the unfinished thought hanging in the air. Robinson finished it for him, his tone grave. She'll start questioning why. Why did she live? Why didn't he go through with it? And more importantly, what's he planning now? Inside the house, Amelia sat at the kitchen table, the detective's words echoing in her mind. The only reason he'd come back home is to kill her and maybe himself. Her hands trembled as she clutched the matching brass key that had been found at the scene. Liam had been here, she realized. The note, his phone, everything pointed to the horrifying truth. He'd come home after killing Marcos, and she had been asleep upstairs, completely unaware. Why didn't he come to me? Her eyes darted to the open diary on the table, the words she'd written blurring as fresh tears welled up. The entries detailed every damning choice she had made, every moment of betrayal. She pressed her hands to her face, her breath shaky and uneven. "Oh my God," she whispered. He read it all. He knows. The idea that Liam had stood in the same room as her, silent and unseen, was unbearable. The realization clawed at her insides, filling her with a mix of fear, shame, and confusion. Back in the patrol car, Clark broke the silence. "Do you think she's telling us the whole story about Marcos? About Liam?" Robinson tapped his pen thoughtfully against his notebook. "I think she's holding back, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of fear. Either way, there's more to it. She knows why Liam would want Marcos dead. The photos we found at the scene prove that." Clark shifted in his seat, frowning. "If Liam really planned to kill her too, why didn't he? What do you think stopped him?" Robinson sighed, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "That's the question, isn't it? Something snapped, or maybe it didn't. Maybe he realized she wasn't the one he wanted to punish. If he's still out there, Clark, I'll bet anything this isn't over. People like Liam don't just disappear. He's got a purpose, and we need to figure out what it is before he acts again." Clark nodded grimly, the weight of the case settling over him. "And Mrs. Miller? She's going to have to face the truth sooner or later," Robinson said. "When she does, she'll understand just how close she came to losing everything.